any longer, and the two men would be caught in the crush. James reached into his cloak to verify that he hadn't left the king's commission in his sea chest. He had left his pistols and sword behind and carried only a small hidden dagger that had served him well in Paris and London. Also in the chest, a tidy sum in silver coin, plus the money he had on his person. The air smelled of brine and fish guts. Seagulls wheeled overhead, crying. All around, men shouted. Sailors, fishermen, immigrants on the deck yelled back and forth to people waiting on the shore. James cleared a path through the passengers and seamen and clomped down the gangplank, with Peter following. A rime of sea ice encrusted the wooden pilings and the surface of the pier itself. James made sure of his footing before stepping off the gangplank. For a moment, he thought the pier was floating because everything was still swaying. Even the ramshackle wooden buildings that lined the harbor seemed to be rocking from side to side as if carried by the waves. Further into town, everything wobbled. The crowded brick buildings, the chimneys, even the smoke trailing into the cold December air. 8 weeks crossing the vast ocean, and his head could no longer tell the difference between the swell of waves and the solid feel of rooted timbers beneath his feet. James had been to sea before, of course, had traveled a dozen times across the Channel to Holland or France, sometimes openly, other times on clandestine business for the crown. Pockets full of silver to bribe French officials, or carrying secret treaties to negotiate with avaricious Dutch merchants. But he'd never before lost sight of land for more than a day or two. The seas had turned angry west of the Cornish coast, and he'd spent a week spewing his supper over the rail until he wanted to throw himself into the ocean to relieve the misery of it. The swaying wharf reminded him of that awful stretch. "Art thou feeling well?" Peter Church asked. "Well enough. You?" "In good health, praise be." "Of course you are." James looked down the pier to the armed men standing on the shore. "This is delicate business. Can you hold your tongue?" "I speak as the Spirit urges, as thou knowest, James." "That's exactly what I mean. This business with Christian names, all of your theeing and thouing, you'll get us flogged and thrown into the pillories, if they don't hang you outright." "I don't fear death." "No? Well, I do." Peter's smile broadened slightly. "And what about the King's commission? Doesn't it offer thee protection?" "Yes and no." James had orders to do the King's bidding, but not the power to do so without subterfuge and outright deception. And yet, didn't that give him more freedom? More latitude to use whatever means and measures he saw fit? He'd vowed before leaving English soil that he would return in triumph, take the prize that was waiting for him in London. "You'll have plenty of time for Quaker nonsense," James said. "When the time comes, I'll even encourage it. For now, patience." The Indian didn't answer. In James's experience, that meant he intended to obey, but did not consent. A small crowd had gathered on the wharf near the armed men James had already identified. They were mostly strong, sober-looking fellows in leather breeches, with heavy woolen cloaks and short-brimmed caps with the flaps pulled down against their ears. They wore wooden clogs over their felt shoes as they stood in the freezing mud. A few boys and women waited among the men, but there was none of the rabble James was accustomed to seeing. In England or on the continent, any harbor was infested with pickpockets, drunks, and other shifty sorts looking to separate the travel-weary from his possessions. Boston, with all of its cold, huddled look, also had a certain tidiness about it. James and Peter strode down the pier toward dry land. James thought briefly about calling for the dockers now unloading the trunks from the Vigilant, retrieving his possessions, and then forcing his way past the men with their muskets. But these men were staring with such hard expressions that it would be openly disingenuous to pretend he didn't see. And so he led